Emma Watson fan, so that's besides that, you know, I kind of thought that it was going to be like these kids that were like the outcast and like nobody really understands them and whatnot, but I didn't think it would go this deep into when it comes to like mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's very
And it
interesting.
wasn't like it wasn't just mental health, but like it was like drug abuse,
Mm-hmm.
alcohol abuse, like sexual violence,
Mm-hmm.
just violence in general. So, like, what did you guys think of overall, like the different, like those type of themes in the book?
It's interesting because usually in these kinds of books or in these kinds of things that we see on TV is usually like a man molesting a woman or a girl. And so to see, like the gender and just um, different points of views, it's like, nope, it happens to everybody. Like,
Yeah.
this is the
Hmm.
reality
Yeah,
of it.
yeah. Yeah, I thought it was interesting that like you mentioned that because I think also just the whole idea of kind of like Charlie's like ups and downs, like of his depression. It just shows that like mental health affects people no matter how young you are or everything like that. Especially also with his sister
Mm-hmm.
dealing with her boyfriend abusing her
Mm-hmm.
and just all of that stuff too. So from um, it just shows different viewpoints.
Yeah.
Overall, there's also a lot of abuse because of the dad as well, like towards the
Yeah.
family in general. And even though it was not physical, it was still mental and like very
Hmm.
vocal. And there's different kinds of degrees of abuse and sexual harassments and whatnot that people don't understand. And also PTSD. A lot of people think that PTSD it comes from the military or like
Hmm.
military background, but it's not. It happens to kids like with abuse or like that they haven't understand or don't know how to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So switching to kind of like the friendship that Charlie has between Sam and Patrick, how would you like describe the relationship? Like, do you think they were a good influence on Charlie?
I think you have to kind of it's perspective based. Like
Mm.
good influence could mean good influence in the sense that they sort of helped bring him out of his shell, but then at the same time, it's like were they the best influences as far as like doing drugs and drinking and like all this stuff that they would kind of bring him along to do? It's kind of like,
Mhm.
well, what's a good influence? Like, kind of good and bad. It goes both ways, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I think it was kind of like not only complicated for them, but for me to understand because like there's just so much going on, and like I think Charlie's and Sam's relationship was especially complicated because especially when they end up dating completely other people and they still manage to be friends.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's funny how you said that, Brenna, because it's true. Because in also in our like family system and how we have different family systems, all four of us, we see what is a good influence through different perspectives. Because what
Mm-hmm.
might be a good influence in my family might not be a good influence in you guys' family. It might be
Yeah,
something different. So that's
yeah.
something that we can bring up to the table and ask the kids, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Hmm. So I think like after researching the author, he said he wanted to try to make this really realistic, and some of the characters are actually based on people he knew. So did you guys make any personal connections with this book?
I think that everybody can kind of relate to Charlie in a sense. Like everybody kind of feels shy into themselves in one situation or another. So I feel like he himself in that aspect, I know me personally, like I'm somebody who hangs back like at parties, and when I was a kid, like I wouldn't dance at school dances and stuff. So like that sort of thing, I feel like that part of him I can relate to.
Hmm. Yeah, I was able to relate to Charlie in the sense like in the beginning he just felt kind of alone in high school and he was like really shy and introverted. And
Mhm.
as someone who is shy and introverted, I could definitely see myself in him, especially when at first he meets Sam and Patrick because he's so excited that he has someone to to talk to and to like spend time with. So that's how I connected the book to my life.
Mhm.
So would you classify this book as an example of contemporary realistic fiction, or would you, after like looking at the characters that were introduced, would you think that they're realistic?
Well, I did research, and when it pops up, it says it's realistic fiction. So, and also what the author mentioned, I think you mentioned this. Please
Mm-hmm.
correct me if I'm wrong. Is that uh, a lot of the characters in this book was from the author's point of view and like some parts of his life, but
Yeah.
he
Mhm.
put different names in it. So
Hmm.
that was very interesting. So yeah, I think it's. I mean, if it's from an author that's putting his
Mhm.
personal, what happened to him
Mhm.
or might have happened to him, who knows? I feel like it just does hit a little bit close to home.
Yeah, and I feel like also, even if it wasn't based on people he knew, I still feel like this book is an example of contemporary realistic fiction because a lot of the characters, like personally for like my high school, there's a lot of characters I was like, oh, I could see, that person in this character. So I feel like he tried to kind of, or the author tried to create a book that had different types of people in high school that were like relatable and like the audience could connect to at least one of the characters.
I feel like too, like one of the biggest things like in this book is the the ability that it had to challenge stereotypes, like in
Mhm.
the sense of like the high school quarterback being gay, you know, and Charlie getting molested by his aunt, like just those things, like it makes it seem more realistic because it's stuff that it's like, that's life, like that actually happens. It's not going to be it's not the typical like story where it's like, oh, boy falls in love with the cheerleader, blah blah blah. Like it actually includes like real life scenarios that some people unfortunately have the experience of going through. And I feel like that's what makes the book so relatable, is that this stuff can actually, it can happen, and it does happen.
Mhm.
What it's very interesting to me is that I want to ask the professor if when he sees this video is what happens if we have a parent that comes up to us as teachers and tells us there's we're reading you guys are reading about this, and I keep hearing from my son or daughter about these kinds of things. Like, what do we tell the parents? Because these are some heavy things that, yes, we do need to talk about, but it still kind of like, okay, how can I make sure that I do not have a parent that comes up to me and it's like, I need you to stop, and then like it just blows out of proportion.
Yeah, like I feel like for this book, it's kind of geared towards like high school or maybe like eighth grade or higher. And I
Hmm.
wouldn't really know, like, I wouldn't really personally use this book for elementary, but you do bring up a good point. Like, if there's a book that's geared towards the elementary range and kind of has these types of topics.
Or at least like sorry, at least like like let couples that are in the LGBTQ community, which is
Yeah,
something that
yeah.
is real, and it's like, okay, we're not teaching this, but it's showing it on the book. Like,
Yeah, I wouldn't really know how to really like, talk to parents about it because I know that like some, I don't know, the only thing I would think of is like if I was going to choose a book that could possibly either be banned, because I know this book has been banned at several libraries or schools. I'd probably send like out like maybe like a slip like letting parents know, and if they're like they don't want their child to read it, then like give them a separate assignment, or like when you talk about the book with like students who like parents allow them to learn about it, then have them like maybe like be in a different area and like do something. That's the only thing I could come up with.
No, that's good. Um, because I did talk to a couple of people in a couple of teachers where I work, and it's elementary, so like of course I would not read this book in elementary, like for a sixth
Yeah.
grader. Um, but they just told me, if it's in the book, like, try not to teach it, but it's like, oh, it's in the book. Like. But other than that, I feel like this book would be great for eighth graders. I don't know what you guys think, because like they're in their tweens.
Yeah, I think 8th or ninth grade would be good. Like especially since Charlie is like a ninth grader, maybe then if you had like freshmen, they could kind of see one example of how Charlie like adjusts to being like a freshman in high school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say 8th grade and high school. But going back to like what you were saying about talking to parents about this kind of stuff, I've spoken to like a couple teachers and professors, and the biggest thing that you can do, I feel like, to sort of back up whatever it is that you're trying to teach is pulling from the standards. So if you have like a list of standards that you're like, okay, look, we're teaching this, this, and this, then there's nothing really that they can fight you on. You know what I mean? Like there may be like a subject or something that they don't agree with, and like Christina said, like you could make like a separate assignment if it's really that big of an issue. But always having like a set of standards from whatever grade it is that you're teaching, like to back up whatever it is that you're trying to teach, is always the best way to sort of support your arguments, because it's in the standards. Like you can't argue with the standards, you know. So yeah, that's just what some teachers have told me, that they've done that, and it sort of helped like alleviate the tension that can sort of arise with like controversial books and controversial topics. But with like technology and stuff these days, like kids know everything. Like you can't hide stuff anymore. So I don't know why people get their panties in a bunch, but like whatever.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, ladies. No, I mean, I did know a couple of like tips and tricks, but like when you're physically there and doing it is different from a classroom setting or a textbook setting. So, I'm just glad that I asked you girls this.
And we're all going to have to deal with that. Like at some
Yeah.
point, there's going to be a parent that's going to have something to say about something that we're doing, because there's always somebody who's going to try to get their way because they don't agree with whatever it is. So it's good to sort of be able to like talk about it and prepare yourself for it, because no matter how much you want to avoid it, it will probably happen.
Oh man. Okay. Any more questions about the book?
No, I don't have any.
Yeah, I don't have any.
I had one. Who do you think Charlie was writing to? Who do you think was his friend, pretty much?
That is a good question.
Because at first I thought he was writing like letters to his Aunt Helen, but then at the end of the book I was kind of like, well, maybe he's writing to his conscience.
Yeah, maybe he's not really necessarily writing to anyone. Like the friend could be like fictitious.
Yeah.
I got the impression that he was sort of writing these letters to himself, just because like you kind of learn or realize that Charlie, he is a wallflower, and he has felt alone since his friend passed away, and maybe it was to his friend that died, or maybe it was to himself. I mean, honestly, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I thought it was just like the same thing. I thought it was just to himself, like a diary or a journal that he
Mhm.
can look back on.
Mhm.